Welcome to The Tax Factor, the UK's top tax podcast from Blick Rothenberg, the tax, accounting and business advisory firm. This week with Malli, Kini and Stefanie Tremain.
Hello and welcome to The Tax Factor, the UK's top tax podcast. I'm Malli, Kini.
And I'm Stefanie Tremain. This is my very first time on The Tax Factor, and I have to say, Malli, I'm excited, but I'm a little bit nervous as well.
Oh, don't worry, Steph. We'll go easy on you. And it's great to have you on board. So throwing you straight in at the deep end, what's been making the tax headlines this week?
The Tax Factor headlines.
Look, I have to say, I haven't seen too much related to the budget this week. So I'm pleased to hopefully just pick up on some non-budget stories this time.
Yeah, luckily, budget fatigue has been settling in for all of us, I think, and we've still got over a month to go until it gets here. This week, we've got quite the lineup. First up, Nigel Farage has found himself in a stamp duty pickle, proof that even political heavyweights need to watch what they say when it comes to tax. Next up, HMRC is eyeing up more powers against tax agents, but is this a necessary crackdown or a threat to how the whole system works? We'll also dive into the world of retailers who are being caught out by Phoenixism tax avoidance schemes and why watchdogs think billions are at stake. And finally, a glimmer of good news for the high street. The Chancellor is exploring reforms to business rates, which could be a real lifeline for small shops still reeling from rising costs.
And there I was hoping for a nice VAT story about chocolate there, Steph. I think you've passed the first episode, nerves with flying colours already. So shall we dive in?
Let's do it.
Well, we thought we'd heard enough about politicians and SDLT. So what's happened with Mr. Farage then?
I know, SDLT is really having a moment in the sunshine, isn't it? Well, this week, Nigel Farage has reminded us of a golden rule in politics and tax, and that is details matter. Now, back in November, and I think it was in his eagerness to get one over on Keir Starmer, Farage said he'd bought a house in Clacton, which sounds simple enough, doesn't it? Except he didn't buy a house in Clacton. It turns out the house was actually bought by his partner, and this is where it gets interesting for us tax geeks. If Farage had bought it himself, it would have counted as a second home, and that would have meant an extra £44,000 of stamp duty. But since his partner, not wife or civil partner, bought the property, it fell under the standard rate. Perfectly legitimate, no tax evasion, and not really any great scandal, but a very different tax bill. Farage has admitted he misspoke and that he should have said we bought the house, not I bought the house. It's the kind of slip that probably feels minor to most people, but in politics and tax, precision is everything. Whether it's who owns the property, who's claiming the relief, or who's filing the tax return, those little words matter. Now, what's the lesson here then? Well, for one, and I think this probably applies to most, if not all politicians, think before you speak. And two, tax really does hinge on the smallest of details. Ownership, timing, declarations, they can change the liability by tens of thousands of pounds. Farage's Clacton house story isn't about mistakes or dodgy behaviour. It's about how in the world of tax and politics, every word counts, every detail counts, and sometimes every £44,000 counts as well.
I think in this instance, it's pretty clear that he was on the right side of the rules as he was cohabiting rather than buying a second home as a married couple. I think it's just obviously the press are very focused in on SDLT stories now, as you say, with other politicians. So this week, the story that I've sort of leaned into is ICAEW has sounded the alarm on the government's new proposals for regulating tax agents. And they say it could actually damage the tax system rather than improve it. So here's a story from April 2026, the government wants all tax agents, that's accountants, advisors, anyone essentially dealing with HMRC on a client's behalf, to register with HMRC and meet minimum standards. On the face of it, that sounds completely sensible. Like weed out any sort of dodgy tax advisors and promoters of tax avoidance schemes. But there is a little bit of a catch the way it's currently drafted. So HMRC would not just be a tax collector, it would also become the regulator and judge of who's fit and proper. That means HMRC could suspend or sanction agents directly with very low threshold for suspicion and penalties linked to potential lost revenue. There's even a strict liability criminal offence for failing to disclose certain tax avoidance schemes. So ICAEW's concern is that this could have major unintended consequences. So good agents, the ones who keep the system running smoothly, could be hit with extra cost, red tape and risk. That makes professional advice less accessible, more expensive, and potentially less robust if advisors feel they can't take on anything, even remotely grey. Some fear it could drive tax advice into law firms where legal privilege offers more protection, narrowing choice for businesses and individuals. So their big ask is essentially to slow things down a little bit, push registration back to April 2027 so that there's time to refine the legislation. So it truly targets bad actors and makes the penalties more proportionate. So the big picture is this. The government wants to clamp down on avoidance, but if it gets it wrong, it risks undermining trust, raising costs for taxpayers and damaging the very compliance culture it's trying to protect.
To be honest, Malli, with a tax regime as complex as the UK's, anything that could make quality tax advice less accessible for taxpayers should be really, really carefully thought through, in my opinion. Okay, here's one that should grab your attention. The National Audit Office has just revealed that HMRC is losing billions each year to small business tax evasion. In 2022-23, the figure hit 5.5 billion, and 81% of that came from the small business sector. That's up from 66% just a few years ago. So how is this happening? Because it sounds absolutely crazy to me. Well, some are using electronic sales suppression. So think tills running in training mode or software that makes sales magically disappear. Others are playing the Phoenix game, closing one company to dodge tax bills and then rising from the ashes, if you will, as a shiny new entity the next day. And let's not forget overseas sellers pretending to be UK-based to avoid VAT. The National Audit Office's message is blunt. HMRC doesn't have an effective strategy to deal with these risks, and enforcement looks pretty light too. Only 7 directors have been disqualified for Phoenixism in the last 5 years, despite the billions at stake. And for us as tax advisors, I think the implications are clear. Compliance pressures are only going to go one way, and that's up. Expect more HMRC scrutiny, more digital oversight, and greater responsibility on us to help clients tighten their systems. And that's particularly true for small retailers, the ones who have already been squeezed by higher employer national insurance costs and other rising costs. I think the opportunity here is for advisors who can help clients keep clean records, build robust internal processes, and avoid even the appearance of evasion. They're the advisors that will stand out. In a climate where billions are leaking from the system, an advisor who can prove their client is squeaky clean isn't just valuable, they're essential. So watch this space, I guess. Tougher checks are coming, and helping clients play fair may be the best competitive edge that you've got.
Completely agree with you, Steph. I mean, with Phoenixism, this has been around for a long time. There's specific legislation to counter this. So I'm quite surprised and astonished with the number that they're quoting, actually. And funnily enough, this is probably the one story that my wife, who's obviously nothing to do with tax, actually tried to test me on. She said, "What is Phoenixism?" She was expecting me to say it might be like a Marvel character or something. But yeah, no.
Something to do with Harry Potter.
So thank you for bringing this story up. But just on the same sort of line to do with retailers and small businesses, it's not all bad news. So this week brought an important signal from the Chancellor on small businesses, especially those on the high streets. Right now, the business rate system is something that people have been clamoring for updating for a long time. Creates a huge cliff edge. So if you're a small business and you open a second shop, cafe, or an office, you risk losing all of your small business rates relief overnight. Now, that can mean a sudden and painful rise in costs, exactly the sort of barrier that we need to stop from creating for entrepreneurs from expanding in the UK. The government is now committed to fixing this. So they're exploring reforms that could smooth out those jumps, moving from a slab system to a fairer slice system. So rates rise gradually as you grow rather than hitting you all at once. From April 2026, there will also be a permanent lower tax rate for retail, hospitality and leisure properties under $500,000 in value, and a 40% discount extended to around 250,000 businesses. That's alongside freezing the small business multiplier. So bills don't climb just because of inflation. So why does this matter? Well, as you say, Steph, our retailers, restaurants and hospitality businesses are already under intense pressure. They face, soaring costs across the board, not just rents and utilities, but also a rise in employer national insurance contributions that, directly increases their wage bills. And for many a business, margins are already razor thin. So these reforms, if they're delivered well, could provide some much needed breathing space by making expansion more affordable and offering permanent relief on smaller properties. The government is at least recognizing that small businesses are the engine of local growth, and they need a tax system that encourages them to invest, hire and open that next site rather than punishing them for it. So the detail will come in the November budget. Okay, I did say budget. I was hoping I wouldn't say that this podcast, but the direction of travel is clear: smoothing out rates, tackling cliff edges, and signaling a pro-growth approach. For entrepreneurs and retailers who've been feeling squeezed, this could make the difference between standing still and taking that next big step.
Yeah, watch this space, I guess.
Absolutely.
Blick Rothenberg, celebrating 80 years.
So, well, that's all we've got time for this week. My thanks to Stefanie Tremain for joining me this week.
Thanks, Malli. Next week, I believe by popular demand, Matt Crawford is back, and joining him is the amazing Suzanne Briggs. Before we go, it's Blick Rothenberg's 80th anniversary this year, and to celebrate, we've created 3 special episodes of The Tax Factor. Each one takes you back to a different decade in tax history, but told in the broadcasting style of the time, as there weren't actually any podcasts back then.
So for the 1940s, we've gone full newsreel with that classic cinema voice, bringing the tax headlines of the day in The Taxation Factor.
Then it's into the 1960s for a pirate radio takeover, packed with the spirit and sound of swinging radio Tax Factor.
And finally, the 1980s, the best decade.
Agreed.
Reimagined as a commercial London talk radio station, Tax Factor FM 97.2, tax news and information for London and the home counties.
You can listen to all 3 right now on the Blick Rothenberg website and on all the usual podcast platforms.
And stay with us, because at the end of this episode, you'll get a short sample. But from us, it's goodbye and thanks for listening.
Goodbye.
That's The Tax Factor. Since launching in August 2023, we've become the UK's top tax podcast in the UK podcast chart. Join us every Friday for expert insight on the latest tax news. Subscribe on your preferred podcast platform or listen direct on the Blick Rothenberg website, where you can also find the latest updates and analysis. The Tax Factor from Blick Rothenberg.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to The Taxation Factor, your weekly wireless bulletin bringing you the very latest in fiscal affairs and revenue reforms from across His Majesty's Treasury. Brought to you by the trusted firm of Blick Rothenberg, Chartered Accountants, proudly serving the capital. Simply telephone Metropolitan 4525 for professional guidance with character and discretion.
Swinging radio, Tax Factor.
Broadcasting live and untaxed from international waters. This is Swinging Radio Tax Factor, the only station where the grooves are smooth, the charts are fiscal, and the Treasury can't touch us. Brought to you by the swingingest of accountants, Blick Rothenberg.
Wonderful radio. Tax Factor, Big T.
I'm your host, Johnny Ledger, coming to you across the nation from the good ship Double Deduction, somewhere off the coast of Frinton.
This is Tax Factor FM 97.2, tax news for London and the home counties.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at the roads and rails around London this morning.
Tax Factor FM 97.2, travel news for London.
The North Circular is crawling from Brent Cross through to Henley's Corner after a breakdown, and the A40 into town is very busy approaching Hanger Lane. On the tubes, there are minor delays on the Northern Line due to a signalling fault at Camden Town. All other lines are reported to be running normally. And if you're heading out of Victoria this morning, do allow extra time. Services to Brighton are running about 20 minutes late after an earlier points problem. 1980s or 2025, it's always the same. More travel for you in 15 minutes.
Capital Gains Breakfast.
Good morning, London. It's the late 1980s, the era of shoulder pads, brick-size mobile phones, and filer faxes stuffed with deals. The pound is strong, the stock market's booming, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nigel Lawson, is rewriting the tax book. Blick Rothenberg, celebrating 80 years.